Pesachim, daf 46, and what a daf it is, chock full of very interesting topics. First, previous Mishnah, we're going to talk about the relationship between the sefah to the reisha. I'll explain that in a minute. Then we're going to talk about unresponsive dough that is sitting around for a while, but doesn't look like it's became chametz, so did it or not? And then we'll talk about an interesting puzzle. If you have Hallah that's Tameh on Yom Tov, how do you cook it and still be able to take Hallah? Okay, really fascinating case. So we start by looking once again at the Mishnah from yesterday. It said, Basek shebesidkei areva, you have dough that's inside the cracks of a bowl. And so we saw one criteria: if there's a kazait, then it's not good. You got to get rid of it. It's considered dough. If it's less than a kazait, then it's batel. It becomes just part of the bowl, and you don't have to worry about it. All right, that's pretty clear. But then the next part is not clear what its relationship is with the beginning. V'chen l'inyan tumah. Also regarding impurity, okay, this is kind of in general in the laws of impurity. If something is in the cracks or on the bowl and you don't want it there, then it's going to be a chatzitza when you dip it in the mikveh. But if you want it to be there because it's serving a purpose and plugging up a hole or something, then it's not a chatzitza. Okay, very good. So that's a good law in general, but what does it have to do with Pesach? So the way I interpreted the Mishnah yesterday, I was trying to relate the two and say that this criteria is also related to Pesach, that if it's something that's integral to the bowl, then you want it there. And so that's like a second criteria. But as we'll see, Bavli today does not understand it this way. Rather, it could be simply a rough analogy. Just like regarding tumah, there's a difference between if you care about it or not. So too on Pesach, it happens to be that a kazayit is significant, and that's going to cause a problem. Less than a kazayit is insignificant. Just like in tumah, if it's something that, like, nail polish that's broken, don't want there. So then that's not good. If it's nice, then you want it there. Then it's okay. So it might be just giving a rough analogy. All right, so the Talmud is going to present four different explanations of this. And the first by Rav Yehuda, that's going to actually change it to is not like, not is like. All right, that's always an easy way to solve a problem by changing the words. Abaye is going to say, no, it's referring not to something, all three are talking about cases that are not on Pesach. Abaye says the law of joining, law of interposition in mikveh, interposition from tumah. Let's see what all these cases are about. Okay, so here Mishnah, we're quoting the end of the Mishnah. V'chen l'inyan tumah, im makpid alav chotzetz, ve'im roseh bekiyumo harehu ka'ariva. Midameh hatam b'shiurat al yamilta, hacha b'kvedat al yamilta. So what is the word v'chen? And the beginning is similar to this case. There at the first half of the Mishnah, it has to do with how big it is. If it's a kazait, it's significant, and you got to get rid of it. Less than a kazait, okay. But here we're talking about tumah and dipping it. This is about your subjective view of it. Do I want this dough to be stuck in there? Then it's okay. Or if I don't want it to be. So these are two completely different criteria. Why is the Mishnah comparing them? First answer, Rav Yehuda, Ema ulyanan tumah enoken. Maybe it says, right, enoken linyan tumah, right? So that it's actually showing a contrast that for Pesach has to do with size. Regarding dipping it in the mikveh, if it becomes impure, that has to do with your view, do you want it there or not? All right, so that would solve the problem, except doesn't say that. Doesn't says that it is similar. Ela Amar Abaye. One note here: Amar Rav Yehuda is a second generation Amora. Abaye is a fourth generation Amora. There's a large gap between them, and yet it says Amar Le as if they're in conversation. I did see some acharon suggest that we take out the word le. It just Amar Abaye. He said it, but he didn't say it to him. But I checked every single manuscript says Amar Le. So I don't think that is possible. I don't know. Could be maybe when Rav Yehuda was very old. It is possible that they met and could have had a conversation, or more likely, this is a created conversation. This is what Abaye would have said to him. Okay, in any case, he has a second answer. וכן לעניין צירוף טומאה בפסח ובשאר ימות השנה איכא פלוגתא. What it's saying is that, and similarly, there is regarding combination of two pieces of dough on Pesach, there's a difference between Pesach and every other day of the year. Let's show exactly what we mean. Let's say I have some food in the bowl, less than a kabesa of food. Let's say it's dough. And now the dough that I have, that I'm kneading in the bowl, touches the dough that's embedded in the wall of the bowl. בפסח דיסרו חשוב מצטרף. בשאר ימות השנה דבקפדה טליה מילתא. אם מקפיד עליו מצטרף, אם רוצה בקיומו, הרי הוא כערבה. I'll explain it backwards. During the rest of the year, right, do we say that that dough that's inside joins together with the food that's inside? The food is less than a kazait. Anything less than a kazait is not going to give off tumah. But does it join together with the dough that's in the walls and then make more than a kazait and then be able to give off tumah? Well, during the year, we say, do you care about that dough? And you'd rather it not be there? If you'd rather it not be there, then it will join together with the food inside, because then it's like food. If you want it to be there because you need it to be part of the wall, then it's not like food. It becomes simply part of the bowl, and it does not join together with the food. Okay, that's all year round. However, on Pesach, the chametz, that dough that's inside the walls of the bowl, kind of come alive, because chametz is so important, importantly prohibited, right? This prohibition makes it important. So even if during the rest of the year you say, I'd like it to be part of the bowl, no, on Pesach, if it's a kezait, for sure, then it is significant in and of itself, and it will join together with the rest of the food that you put in and create a kezait for the laws of tumah. Okay, that's answer number 2. Matkif la Rava mi katane mistaref. No, it doesn't say v'chen linyan mistaref or tziruf. V'chotzetz katane. It says, right, v'chen, well, the exact words were v'chen linyan tumah, right? So it should be something that's as a that's something that, well, that it kind of does work, but Rava says, yeah, but in the rest of it, it says here in the rest of it says otherwise it's not. So it wasn't saying, it didn't say if you makpid then it's mitztaref, right? It says chotzetz, so it doesn't really fit with the words. Okay, so he doesn't like that. Rather, ela marava v'chen lahalot tahora la'areva. Oh, it's talking actually about purifying the kneading bowl by putting it in a mikveh. How so? Hechidameh kegon de'it tameh hach areba. The bowl became tameh. Uba'el atbule. And you want to dip it in the mikveh. Now you want to make sure there's no chatzitza. But Pesach di surah chashub chotzetz. On Pesach, any dough that's there is important, certainly if it's a kezait, and therefore it will be a chatzitza, even if it's inside the walls, right? The prohibition makes it important, and so therefore you cannot dip the bowl, you cannot kosher it on Pesach if it has dough in it. Vela salka la tevilah, then tevilah does not work. B'shari mot hashana b'kpedat halia milita. Ibakpid alav choses v'mirose b'kiyumo hareu kareba. But during the rest of the year, then it depends on your mindset. If you don't want it to be there, it will be a chatzitza. But if you want it to be there, it's plugging up a hole. Then even if it's a kezait, then it's fine. So the two halves of the Mishnah, the first half is talking about on Pesach, regarding tumah, well, I mean, it's talking about you have to get rid of it. But just like if you have to get rid of it, then so too, if you want to kosher the bowl on Pesach, then you have to get rid of anything that is kezait. And the rest of the year, so it's talking about on Pesach, and then it's talking about the rest of the year, it's about makpid. Okay, you see, it doesn't say this is and not on Pesach, right? So this is you're definitely adding some words in. You have to, give some explanation for what the comparison is. Okay, and lastly, matkif Rav Papa mikatane v'chen inyan tahora. Mishnah doesn't say, and so too regarding purifying. Halinyan tumah katane, it says regarding impurity. So that your explanation does not fit the words well either. Rav Papa is now the next generation, fifth generation. Ella amar Rav Papa v'chen inyan lehorid tumah. La areva. This is actually we're talking about giving ritual impurity to the kneading bowl itself through the dough, if something touches the dough. So sheres comes, a dead mouse, touches the dough part of the bowl, only, not the ceramic part of the bowl. But Pesach di chashub chotzitz. This is actually likula, right? On Pesach, if it touches the dough, since the dough is significant in and of itself, because it's prohibited, it's as chametz, so it will be an interposition, and therefore the dead mouse will make the dough itself tameh, but not the rest of the bowl. It protects the rest of the bowl. But during the rest of the year, when dough is not so significant, chametz is not significant, there, if you want this dough to be in there, then it becomes part of the bowl. And that actually is a problem, because once it touches this dough, it's part of the bowl, then the entire bowl becomes tameh as well. Okay, so those were the four explanations. I suppose that Rava seems to be the closest to the a simple meaning, that it's giving a general comparison that during regarding tumah, this is depends on if you care about it or not. On Pesach, a kezait is something that we care about. Okay, good. Now, this unresponsive dough, right? How long do we have to wait until we can assume that dough that doesn't look, if you see that it's leavened, right? You see it rising, then obviously you can tell. But if you can't tell, it doesn't look like anything, then how long is the amount of time that we would assume? We're going to say it's a time it takes to walk a meal, which is also the source of our word mile. And we're going to see some other laws that relate to that same time period. Okay, basek hacheresh, very interesting term, a deaf dough. Well, how is dough deaf? Okay, some various explanations. It seems to mean that it's just like a deaf person is not so responsive. If you call them, they can't quite hear you. You got to get their attention. This dough is not responding to the usual leavening process. Or another explanation I like is in the name of Rambam, is that if you tap it, it doesn't make any sound. Like just raw dough, tap it is not gonna hear anything. Where it starts leavening, it gets a little harder and crusty. Then you can hear it and tap it, and it sounds like something. I like that explanation because it helps us explain. Remember that term we saw in the Talmud, chametz nikaf, right? That nukshe, chametz nukshe, which means something that you can knock, and that was referring to chametz that we suspect is chametz, but we're not sure about it. So this would be the opposite. It doesn't look like chametz, but there's reason to suspect that it is. Okay, anyway, this is basek, that this dough that doesn't look like it's leavening. If there's another piece of dough that is leavening alongside it, in other words, I made two pieces of dough at the same time and I left them, and I come back an hour later, one is leavening and one is not. Well, then I should assume that both of them are chametz, because they were there. I did a side by side, and it's lasted enough time for it to leaven. Maybe for some reason it's just not showing it. All right, that's the Mishnah. Okay, Gemara asks a good question. Right? What if I don't have a test case, a double-blind study here, and I only have this one dough, and I don't know how long it would take. So I'm just not sure. Maybe it's still kasher. Maybe it's chametz. Well, is there a time limit? Amar Rabbi Abu, Amar Rabbi Shimon, Amar Shimon ben Lakish, Kedei sheyelech adam migdal nunya litiberia meal. If you wait the amount of time it takes to walk from Migdal Nunya to Tiberias, Here's a nice map, right? Migdal Nunya to Tiberias is here. This is about 1 kilometer in distance. Migdal Nunya is a very important city actually for archaeologists because recently, in the past, 10 years, 2009, they were digging a hotel. And as they were digging the foundation, they found an ancient synagogue from the 1st century CE. In other words, a Bet Knesset that existed during the time of the Bet HaMikdash, right? Quite amazing. Well, you'd need one because if you're living in Migdal Nunya, you can't really go to shul every day traveling to Jerusalem, so they needed their own Bet Knesset. And in it, they found this decoration that had a menorah on it. So this is an actual depiction of the menorah from the time of the Bet HaMikdash. Okay, so Migdal Nunya is a very nice place. Obviously, Tiberias, famous city. And so for the time it takes for a walk from one to the other, that would be, that's the time it would be. Now, why do you have to say, okay, that, which is a meal? A meal is the same word as what we say is mile, even though it's not the same as our mile. It's about 0.6 of what we call a mile. How long is this? There are different estimations. For this, we're going to say 18 minutes. I'm going to say 22, 24. But since this, we're going to be machmir because we don't want to violate chametz. So this is the source where we get that you can, you need to get the dough into the oven within 18 minutes. Okay, now Venem Amil, question on Resh Lakish. Why does he say the amount of time it takes to walk from Migdal Nunya to Tiberias, which is a meal? Just say it's a meal. Then everybody knows what a meal is. No, maybe not everybody knows what a meal is. And so this is the source. This is where it's teaching us that it's this long, from Migdal Nunya until Tiberias. And therefore, by putting this into a halachic formulation, this will be transmitted and remembered. If in case anyone wonders, how big is a meal? Okay, go there, walk the walk, and you'll see how big it is. It's a lot easier to transmit information when it is actually encoded within a halacha, because they would memorize these halachot with these professional memorizers. So if you just say meal and as a commentary, by the way, this is how big it is, right? That might get lost. So it builds it into the statement. That's very good. All right, so now that's that. But now that you mentioned this meal, a few other laws. Amar bi Abu, Amar bi Shimon ben Lakish, same sage as before. That the same is true. La gabal, vela tefila, for these 3 items, the measurement is 4 meal. Okay, it's a little cryptic what these items are, and there's number of explanations. Gabal is a professional kneader, right? It's a lot of work, so sometimes you'd hire a kneader. So if you're kneading dough, let's explain it according to the Geonim, who say it has to do with Pesach. If you leave dough on by itself, then 18 minutes is the max. Right? Yeah, you got to get it into the oven. It'll before that, otherwise it's going to leaven. But if you're kneading it, the act of kneading is going to drastically slow down the process of leavening. So as long as you're continuously kneading it, you can do that up to 4 milin. In other words, up to 72 minutes. So that gives you some more time, but you got to be kneading it the whole time. Okay, so that's one explanation. Vela tefila. This could mean that maybe to wash your hands before praying, or okay. So this might be about or has to do with tefilat haderech. How long do you have to go before you have to say tefilat haderech? So if the distance is 72 minutes, which is actually it brought down in halacha as well, so that distance is already considered a significant traveling, a significant journey. You should say tefilat haderech. Okay, and the tilat yadayim, if you're eating, you can eat bread and there's no water around, right? So how far do you have to travel to get water? Or if you're washing your hands before prayer, so 4 meal. If you can get it within 4 meal, then you got to go and get it. If not, then you can do without that netilat yadayim. Good. Amar Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak, Aibu Amara. So first of all, he argues on one thing, that it's not Rabbi Abu Huda said it, but rather Aibu said it. And this arba'a amarba. And there wasn't 3 items that he mentioned, but was one more to add. which is v'chadam minayhu ibud. We're talking about tanning of leather a certain amount of time. What's the case? Ditnan v'chulan shebedan o shilech behen kedei avoda tehorin. Chutz me'or ha'adam. Okay, well, if you have leather of a soft leather of an animal, while it's soft, it's considered like the flesh regarding tumah and tahara, right? In other words, still like food, so that if something tameh touches it, it will get tumah of food. At what point does it turn from food into leather, which is now hard and not edible and becomes a different item altogether? Well, the first step of the tanning process is they would walk on the skin until it got hardened and dried out. So how much walking on it do you need to have before it becomes not food and now leather? The answer is 4 milin. That's how much, right? V'chama kedei avoda amar Rabbi Inya amar Rabbi Yanai kedei hiluch 4 milin. Good. So we added that to the list. And one last halacha related to this: Amar Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina lo shenu ela lefanav aval acharav afilu mil eno chozer. If you are traveling and you want to eat your sandwich and you need to do netilat yadayim, when we said you have to travel 72 minutes to get water, that's only in front of you. If it's on the way to where you're going, then don't stop for lunch right now. Go and keep walking another hour, another 72 minutes until you get to a place where you can get water. But if you don't, what about backwards? No, not backwards. If the water's behind you and you already passed it, you don't have to go back an hour, right? Even one meal, you don't have to go backwards to get water. Ravacha is qualifying that leniency with being a little bit more strict. Yeah, you don't have to go back 18 minutes, but less than 18 minutes, if you just passed the way station 10 minutes ago and you forgot, I had to do the netilat yadayim, and that is not going to be another one for a while, then you do have to go back out of your way for up to 18 minutes, but not more. All right, good. So those are some interesting and famous halachot that have to do with times. All right, and finally we get to the puzzle of the day. Kesad mafrishin Hallah betumah beyom tov. Let's explain why this is such a problem. Okay, now you're baking masa on Yom Tov. Nowadays, people will be scared to bake masa on Yom Tov because it becomes chametz and whatever. But in those days, everybody did. So you're baking on Yom Tov. You're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. So that's not a problem. But you're only allowed to cook on Yom Tov something that you're going to eat that day, right? You can cook on Yom Tov for Yom Tov. You can't cook on Yom Tov for something that you're not planning on eating. Okay, so now I make a big dough, enough that I have to take Hallah. The problem is the dough became Tameh. So now I'm going to take Hallah, but this Hallah is Tameh. So who can eat it? Yisrael can't eat it because it's terumah. A Kohen cannot eat it because it's Tameh. So nobody can eat it. So what am I going to do? I'm kneading this big dough. I take a piece of dough and say, this is going to be terumah. I put it on the side. Usually all year round, I would separate it. And then I would put it in the oven, right, with everything else, and put this in a separate area. And then after it was all baked, I would give it to the Kohen. And then the Kohen can enjoy it. If it's Tameh, the Kohen wouldn't. What's the problem here? Since nobody can eat it, how can I bake it on Yom Tov, right? And so if I just leave it out, then it's going to become chametz. If I put it in the oven, I'm going to violate cooking on Shabbat, cooking on Yom Tov, without the possibility of it being eaten. And so we're kind of stuck. All right, so that's what the Mishnah presents. And you can think of, if you can think of a solution, let me know. The Mishnah provides 3 solutions. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Lo tikra Lashem ad shete'afer. Here's what you do. You separate, but you don't call it terumah. Okay, you put the loaves in the oven, and you don't designate which one is going to be terumah. So therefore, you put them all in. Potentially, you could eat any of them, and that's why you're allowed to bake them, because it's Yom Tov, and you might eat any of them. Only after you bake them, then you say this one's going to be challah, but you already baked it, so then you're okay. That's answer number 1. Ben Betera Omer tatil besonen. He says, separate the dough, say this is terumah, and put it in a cold glass of water. because the coldness of the water will prevent it from becoming hametz. And then you leave it like that until Yom Tov is over. When Yom Tov is done, then you can burn it, destroy it. Good. Amar Rabbi Yehoshua, lo zehu chamesh shemuzarin ala bebal yere'eh ubal yemaseh, ela mafrishata umanichata ad ha'areb, v'mechmisa hechmisa. He has the simplest solution, although the most interesting halachically. He says this is not called chametz that the Torah said that bal yere'eh bal yemaseh, right? This is lo yere'eh lecha seor. You may not have chametz in your possession if it's yours, right? But this is not mine. This I donated to the Kohen. I didn't give it to the Kohen yet, but I separated. I said, this I will give to a Kohen. Once I do that, it's like Hekdesh. It's not mine. It's not in my possession. And therefore, I separate it, just put it on the counter and leave it there. Even if it becomes chametz right there on my kitchen counter, not my problem. It's totally okay. So that's a nice, easy solution. Okay, let's see our outline. So we saw three answers. Eliezer says separate it after baking. Ben Betera says put in cold water. Yehoshua says not your problem because it's not yours. All right, we're going to see now what is the crux of their argument, right? What is the essentially mostly between 1 and 3? Number one is it's the right of giving. Is that worth money or not, right? Does it, because I can give it to any Kohen I want and he'll say thank you, does that have a monetary worth or does it not have a monetary worth? Well, this will make a difference, right? Because if I separate it, we'll see. Okay, now second is it's the since principle is potential like reality. I can potentially undo what I just gave in a bet din. All right, let's see how these apply. So lema betobat hana'a kami palge. The Rabbi Eliezer sabar tobat hana'a mamon. The Rabbi Yehoshua sabar tobat hana'a ena mamon. Okay, maybe they're talking about the right to distribute this, right? They're sitting on my table and it's not mine. But the question is, since I have a right to decide who I want to give it to, so in that I have a little bit of ownership in that sense, is that worth a monetary value? So the Eliezer says it is a monetary value, and therefore I cannot just leave it around as is. Rather, I have to bake it. Right, I have to bake it now. Even though by baking it, I'm potentially baking something that I'm not going to eat, which is a violation of cooking on Yom Tov. But he says, I can't leave it around because it is mine. Rabbi Yehoshua says, Tobatana enamamon. He says that it's not mine. It's given to a Kohen. And the fact that I can decide which Kohen I want to give it to, and he's going to say thank you, that does not have a monetary value. And therefore, I can leave it on my table. I don't violate Bal Yamaseh. It's not mine at all. Good. That's one explanation. Second explanation. Truth is, I would say that they're probably arguing on this very principle of do you say Bal Yamaseh if it doesn't belong to you? That was based on the derasha lecha, right? Maybe the Eliezer thinks that even if you don't own it, you still can't have it around at all. Which, if you remember all the way back in the beginning, the introduction to the Masechet, we saw that the pshat of the Torah sounds like you have to get rid of all chametz from the entire land. So I think that's actually what's behind the Eliezer's comment, but the Gemara is assuming that Rabbi Eliezer agrees in principle that you could have it around if it's not yours. But the problem is, even here, even though you designate it for as tumah, you still have some financial some financial benefit from it by the right to be able to give it. Okay, second explanation. Everyone agrees, actually, no, it's not worth any money. So Rabbi Eliezer so in fact, Rabbi Eliezer thinks that it's not worth money in itself. And so therefore, I would be able to keep it around. The problem is, since I could go to the rabbis and I say, I gave this as terumah, I feel bad that I did that, I want to undo that designation, and then they would be able to do it. So since potentially I could regain ownership, therefore it's as if I do have ownership. The potential is like an actual ownership, and therefore I cannot keep it around, just in case the possibility that I could revoke the Hallah status. I kept saying terumah before, I'm sorry, it's Hallah. Okay. Rabbi Yehoshua Sabad lo amrinan ho'il. Rabbi Yehoshua says no. We do not say the ho'il principle. Once I designate, I said this is Hallah, then that's it. It is Hallah. Even though technically I could go back and change it after. If you change it after, okay, now you change things. But the potential that I could do that does not give it a status of ownership, and therefore you don't have to worry about it. Okay, good. Itemar. Now, regarding this ho'il principle, we have some discussion. Ha'ofeh miyom tov lachol. Rav Chisda amar lokeh. Rabba amar eno lokeh. If I cook on Yom Tov with intention that I'm not going to eat it on Yom Tov, I am preparing for lunch tomorrow, right? The next day, which is Chol. So if I do that, Rav Chisda says, I get malkut, right? Because I cooked in violation of Yom Tov. Rabba omer no lokeh, I do not get malkut. Why? So let's see. Amar Rav Chisda amar lokeh, lo amrinan ho'il mikla'ele orchim hazile. Rabba amar eno lokeh amrinan ho'il. So Rabba says you don't get punishment here because since if guests would suddenly walk in, right, then I would have food and they would eat it. Therefore, even if guests don't come, and I eat it tomorrow, it's okay. So Rabbah applies the ho'il principle, and that's why he says you would not get lashes. Whereas Rav Chisda does not apply the ho'il principle. I'm sitting here, I'm cooking. I didn't invite anybody, and so I'm cooking for tomorrow. So that's my intention. And I don't say potentially if guests would have come, then I would have served it to them. That we don't apply the potential is like actual principle. Okay, good. So the same principle we saw here between these two Tanaim can explain this machloket between these two Amoraim as well. Now a challenge, Amar le Rabba le Rav Chisda. You don't apply the principle of potential as like actual. Okay, then how can you ever cook on Yom Tov to prepare for Shabbat? Right? For Yom Tov to Chol, for sure it's going to be a problem. But even Yom Tov to Shabbat, I can only cook on Yom Tov for Yom Tov. So, according to me, Rabbah says I have the principle of since potentially guests could come at any moment on Yom Tov, and then I would feed it to them. Therefore, I'm allowed to cook on Yom Tov and. Well, guests aren't going to come, so then I can use it on Shabbat, but I have that ho'il will get me out of the prohibition. But you don't say that, so therefore you have a problem because you would not be allowed midoraita to cook on Yom Tov, not even for Shabbat. So what do you do? Amar le mishum eruv tavshilin. He says, oh, that's why we have eruv tavshilin, right? We start preparing a meal before Yom Tov starts. We prepare a little an egg and masa, whatever you want to make as a eruv, and then that means I started cooking already before, and on Yom Tov now I'm just adding to it. I'm just continuing, and that makes it allowed. All right. Well, is not good enough, right? This is a deoraita prohibition. The whole eruv tavshilin is a derabanan. It's a kind of a loophole, a workaround that can undo a derabanan. It can't undo a deoraita. You can't just make an eruv and then be allowed to cook against an isur deoraita. So that doesn't work either. So actually, at the Torah level, I would be able to prepare from Yom Tov to Shabbat. It's not the same as Yom Tov to Chol. Yom Tov to Chol is complete violation. Yom Tov Shabbat, you're going up a level, right? A little higher Kedusha. So the Torah allows you to. And the prohibition is only midrabanan. Rabbanan hu de gazrube. Gezra shema yomru afil Yom Tov af lechol. The rabbi said people are going to misperceive it. They're going to see if we tell them that you're allowed to prepare from Yom Tov to the next day when it's in Shabbat, they're not going to realize that that's the reason why it's allowed, and they're going to assume that it's allowed to prepare from Yom Tov to Chol. And so therefore, because so that the people will not make that mistake, therefore the rabbi said, in order to cook from Chol and Yom Tov, midoraita, it's allowed. But so people don't make a mistake, we're going to make you do this extra step, start from before, and that way you'll know as a remembrance that you cannot do this from Shabbat to Shabbat from Yom Tov to Chol. Okay, very good. So that's actually we went through the entire Masechet Eruvin and we never had a good explanation of what Eruv Tavshilin is all about. We had to wait until here to get it. Okay, and final question. Itibe. Rabba asks Rav Chisda, Behema hamisukenet lo yishchot ela kedei sheyachol le'echol hemena kazayit sali mebe'od yom. You have you're on Yom Tov in the afternoon, and you have a animal that's dangerously ill. It may die at any moment, and if it dies, it'll be nevela, and we will have to just give away the whole thing. So you want to do shechita while it's still healthy enough and alive. So Braita says you may not kill it unless you may not do shechita unless you could eat from it a kezayit before it gets dark. Okay, so you have to have enough time to be able to do shechita, right? Drain the blood, cut it, cook it, salt it, barbecue, however you're going to prepare it, and eat a kezayit. That's the minimum amount, because if you're not going to be able to possibly eat a kezayit, then you're only doing shechita to eat it after Yom Tov, which is totally not allowed. Okay. Yachol le'echol. So that's the end of the Braita. Now we analyze. Yachol le'echol afagav de lo lemechal. It just says you have to potentially be able to eat it, even if you don't actually want to eat it. Right? You might be totally full. You just had a big meal, and you look outside. You see this animal in distress. So even if I don't want to eat it, I'm still allowed to prepare the animal. So this follows. This makes sense for me, Rabba says, because I have the since principle. Since potentially I could eat it, therefore it's as if I did eat it. Since, right, if I wanted to, I would have time to eat it, then I can do it, even if I have no intention of actually eating it. But according to you, say you don't want it, right? And you now don't have intention to eat it, and you don't have the since principle. According to you, why is it Baraita saying that I'm allowed to do shechita? All right, good question. He says, no, we have to allow it for the person to do shechita's animal. Otherwise, he's going to lose the whole animals, hundreds of dollars, going to go down the drain. So we got to give him a leniency so that he can do shechita now before it dies, even though he's not planning on eating it on Yom Tov. Okay, wow, that's a crazy answer. Mishum have said because he's going to lose money, so we allow him to violate a doraita law, right? I mean, you could do shechita and all that on Tov only if you're going to eat it. You're not going to eat it. Now you're violating. You're going to shechita on Yom Tov just because he's losing money. Right? We don't do that. Says yes, this is what I meant to say. Not that you're actually going to violate, but rather that the person says, I'm full, I don't want to eat. But now he realizes if he doesn't agree to eat a kezayit, he's going to lose the whole animal. So he says, okay, I want to eat a kezayit, right? So he wants to, not because he's hungry, but rather because wanting to eat a kezayit will help him save the animal. And even though he only has room to stuff in one kezayit, but even for that one kezayit, you can't get one kezayit out of the animal unless you do shechita and of the whole animal. So therefore, even for that one kezayit that he is willing to eat in order to save the animal, that's enough of what that he wants to, even though technically he's not hungry for the animal in and of itself. Okay, so many important principles regarding the time that we wait to something to become chametz, or if you're kneading it, and also other laws of how far you need to go to get water and bread, water to wash, and this ho'il principle, which is very interesting and helps us solve the Hallah, Tameh, Yom Tov puzzle. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.